Tired of trying diet after diet without results? Mochi Health offers a long-term weight loss solution personalized to your needs. Our board-certified obesity doctors and registered dietitians provide expert guidance to help you succeed. Eligible patients can access custom-formulated GLP-1 medication at an affordable set price delivered monthly. Take our free quiz at joinmochi.com and use code AUDIO40 for $40 off your first month. That's joinmochi.com.
Hey, all you true crime fans, this is Mike Ferguson.
And this is Mike Morford.
And we'd like to invite you to listen to our podcast, Criminology.
Launched in 2017, we've covered a variety of strange cases from murders to missing persons.
We dive into a variety of cases in both the U.S. and abroad.
Some of the cases are ones you may not have heard of, like the Pocatello babysitter murders or the Canal murders.
Other cases we cover are some of the most historic in true crime, like the Tylenol murders and the Lindbergh kidnapping. We also dive into cases that are currently breaking thanks to DNA and forensic genealogy.
Sometimes you'll hear from people connected to the cases, like the interview we did with the brother-in-law of the Golden State Killer, Joseph D'Angelo.
There are 200 episodes of Criminology available to binge on right now, including full seasons covering the Zodiac Killer, the Golden State Killer, and Ted Bundy, and new episodes come out every Saturday night.
Subscribe to Criminology today, wherever you listen to your podcast.
You're listening to Zodiac Speaking, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, DNA ID, Scene of the Crime,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
and Citizen Detective. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
This is the Zodiac speaking.
On October 23rd, 1969, the day after Zodiac imposter Eric Weil rang into the Jim Dunbar TV show, there began a 2-week period of prolonged threats upon the life of 24-year-old Richmond schoolteacher Daniel Williams, who was subjected to a barrage of threatening phone calls and somebody stalking his 1234 Bush Street residence in Martinez that culminated in an attempted poisoning of his 7-Up drink with arsenic and a sinister phone call to the Martinez Police Department on November 5th, 1969 that claimed there's going to be a shooting at 1234 Bush Street. The malicious caller to 1234 Bush Street, stating he was the Zodiac, claimed he was thwarted by police outside of Martinez school during a search for victims, but they wouldn't catch him because, quote, I'm too smart for them. In one of the phone calls, he threatened to kill the lady in the blue house, and in the final telephone call on November 2nd, 1969, made a direct threat to Daniel Williams, saying, you're the dead duck. Later that day, Daniel Williams took a sip of 7-Up from his refrigerator and immediately noticed a metallic taste in his mouth, resulting in him spitting out the drink. Fortunately for Daniel, this saved his life, because later tests on the refreshment found that it had been spiked with more than enough arsenic to kill someone. 3 days after his attempted murder, somebody rang the Martinez Police Department and informed police there's going to be a shooting at 1234 Bush Street. It was comfortable for police then, and for many members of the Zodiac community today, to write off many police calls claiming to be the Zodiac as hoaxes, without any shred of evidence to show they were the real Zodiac. It's possible that certain individuals may have made malicious phone calls to the police and press claiming to be the Zodiac, but just saying so doesn't make it true. That's why we need to delve deeper into these occurrences and see if we can unearth any more information into the possibility that the Zodiac did indeed change his way of collecting slaves and targeted schoolteacher Daniel Williams in the aftermath of threats upon schoolchildren in the same month. After the threat was delivered to the Martinez Police Department on November 5th, 1969, 2 communications to the San Francisco Chronicle would arrive postmarked November 8th and November 9th, 1969. The second, which opened with the lines, "This is the Zodiac speaking. Up to the end of October, I have killed 7 people. I've grown rather angry with the police for their telling lies about me, So I shall change the way of collecting of slaves. I shall no longer announce to anyone. When I commit my murders, they shall look like routine robberies, killings of anger, a few fake accidents, etc. The police shall never catch me because I have been too clever for them.
The first few lines of the November the 9th, 1969 bus bomb letter are very telling, suggesting that the Zodiac killer was quite prepared to not only change his way of collecting slaves, but to make some of them look like accidents or acts of nature. The second paragraph is particularly noteworthy because the Zodiac killer stated, quote, "The police shall never catch me because I have been too clever for them." In one of the malicious telephone calls to Daniel Williams, the person claimed that the police would never catch him because, quote, "I'm too smart for them." This similar phraseology could suggest a running theme between the phone caller and letter writer within days of one another. The November the 8th, 1969 dripping pen card hinted at unfinished and ongoing business by the Zodiac killer when he stated, quote, "I thought you would need a good laugh before you hear the bad news," and "You won't get the news for a while yet." This was followed up by a continued theme of unfinished business in the November the 9th, 1969 letter, when the Zodiac killer stated, "Up to the end of October, I have killed 7 people." One has to question why the Zodiac killer was only claiming 7 victims up to the end of October when it was now November the 9th, 1969. This strongly suggests that from November the 1st, 1969, to the mailing of this latest communication on November the 9th, 1969, he was actively seeking victim number 8. At the very least, this is what can be inferred by the fact the Zodiac killer did not simply claim 7 victims on November the 9th, 1969. We have the distinct possibility that the Zodiac killer may have targeted Daniel Williams for at least 2 weeks, but had unfinished business with a schoolteacher that was continuing throughout the early days of November. Or this is what he wanted us to believe. Another thing in the November the 9th, 1969 bus bomb letter may link to the targeting of Daniel Williams when the Zodiac killer left a puzzle at the foot of the communication with 5 X's marked on the hour positions of a clock face within his crosshairs. Accompanying the crosshairs was a further threat stating, quote, "P.S. Be sure to print the part I marked out on page 3 or I shall do my thing." This threat was positioned within the axes of the crosshairs, suggesting that only 4 of the X's would be relevant to crimes he already committed, with the 5th X relevant to the one he was about to commit. If the theme was continued, then this impending threat was likely to be an attack on the Martinez home of Daniel Williams or the Salesian High School in Richmond where he taught. If the Zodiac killer's continued threats on schoolchildren were to continue, bearing in mind his previous threat on a Martinez school, then targeting Salesian High School by the use of this 5th X around the circumference of the crosshairs would be a reasonable proposition. Despite 50-plus years of speculating on these particular crosshairs in the Zodiac community, somebody from the San Francisco Chronicle newspaper on November the 12th, 1969, likely went a long way to answering the meaning behind these crosshairs after only a couple of days.
The San Francisco Chronicle article on November 12, 1969 stated, quote, "Zodiac's letter contained 5 cross marks, which possibly refers to attacks. Comparing these markings against a map, one interpretation that can be drawn is that they pinpoint Lake Berryessa, Vallejo, where 2 attacks occurred, San Francisco, and San Jose. It may be the case that 4 of the X's were previous attacks, with the 5th X the puzzle Zodiac wanted us to work out. In other words, the thing he promised to do if the newspaper didn't print the portion of text he marked out on page 3. The X's on the crosshairs were very likely positioned in respect to Mount Diablo, and the precursor to his Mount Diablo map and code on June 26, 1970, in which he would again tempt us with the location to be found. The Zodiac's first 2 attacks at Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs, when a line is drawn through the crime scenes, it passes directly over the summit of Mount Diablo. when his crosshairs from the bus bomb letter were centered over Mount Diablo. This line would pass through the 10 o'clock position on the circumference. A line drawn from Mount Diablo to Lake Berryessa would pass through the 11 o'clock position. A line drawn from Mount Diablo to Presidio Heights would pass through the 8 o'clock position. A line drawn from Mount Diablo to San Jose would pass through the 6 o'clock position. Only the 9 o'clock position was unaccounted for. Therefore, his threat of doing his thing if his words weren't printed would likely fall somewhere along this line. When we travel along this line, it becomes apparent very quickly that the 9 o'clock line passes exactly over the high school that Daniel Williams taught at. To achieve this alignment of the crosshairs on the map of Northern California, the crosshairs have to be tilted slightly clockwise, just like the Zodiac instructed us to do in the June 26, 1970 Mount Diablo map, where he stated, 0 is to be set to magnetic north. On this occasion, the 0 or 12 o'clock position sits at approximately 13 degrees, slightly short of magnetic north. Regardless of this slight discrepancy, we see the same technique he used on June 26, 1970, being implemented just over 7 months earlier. On June 26, 1970, the Zodiac was threatening to plant a bomb to blow up a school bus, and on November 9, 1969, he could have been using the same playbook by suggesting he was searching for victims at the Salesian High School of Daniel Williams, or Daniel Williams himself, the common thread being the school buses and school children.
In the bus bomb letter, the Zodiac stated, quote, "What you do not know is whether the death machine is at the site or whether it is being stored in my basement for future use. I think you do not have the manpower to stop this one by continually searching the roadsides looking for this thing, and it won't do to reroute and reschedule the buses because the bomb can be adapted to new conditions." End quote. Although most people are in agreement that these were idle threats by the Zodiac Killer, the selection of a target for police to uncover would have been taken very seriously. The Zodiac Killer used the wording, "What you do not know is whether the death machine is at the site or whether it is being stored in my basement." Although he misspelled the word site, the definition of site is usually described as an area where something is built or to be built, or a location where a historic or important event took place. This may suggest he was currently not targeting a random piece of roadside on a school bus route, but a piece of roadside where a building was located, possibly close to a school such as Salesian High. It is easy to claim that the telephone caller to Daniel Williams' Martinez residence was a hoaxer, but this person not only claimed he was a Zodiac Killer and targeted a school teacher, he stalked the residence and pried open the screen door of the house to gain access, poisoned Daniel Williams' drink with arsenic, and rang the Martinez Police Department, threatening to shoot his victim. This goes well beyond what is required of a hoaxer attempting to imitate the Bay Area murderer. If somebody wanted to kill the schoolteacher while diverting the blame towards the Zodiac Killer, what they actually achieved was a lot of unnecessary attention in the process. They could have just killed Daniel Williams and then rang the police claiming they were the Zodiac Killer. This person appeared driven by attention, akin to the Zodiac Killer, who advertised his intentions in the very first letters he mailed to the newspapers on July the 31st, 1969. The telephone caller to Daniel Williams may have also telegraphed his future intentions when he stated he was going to kill the lady in the blue house. The Zodiac Killer's crimes to this point had been 3 couples and a single male. He had never yet targeted a lone female. 3 weeks after threatening to kill a lady in a blue house, a letter purportedly from the Zodiac Killer arrived at the San Jose Police Department threatening a woman that resulted in 24-hour protection afforded to her home and person. The identity of this woman may have been found by Zodiac contributor Craigle. What is unknown, however, is did she live in a blue house in San Jose?
Many people have attempted to reason that the Zodiac selected victim locations based on radians or other factors. Yet here we have 4 confirmed attacks and 1 claimed attack that seem to correlate with the hour markers on a clock face. When the Zodiac provided the crosshairs on the bus bomb letter, In addition to the 5 X's, he placed dots on the remaining hour markers around the circumference as though he was suggesting, filling up the remaining positions on the clock face. This would have given the Zodiac 12 attacks at 30-degree angles around California. It seems rather fanciful to believe that the Zodiac killer pre-selected locations based on a clock face, especially when we consider he wasn't responsible for the 2 murders in San Jose. Unless, of course, he incorporated this crime into his model, noticing that it roughly landed at the 6 o'clock position. Whether this was his initial goal of killing people based on positions around a clock face is uncertain, but later crimes he laid claim to broke with this model. Therefore, it may have been an early concept he abandoned, or he simply noticed his crimes approximated the positions on a clock face after the fact. The person in the San Francisco Chronicle article on November 12, 1969, almost certainly concluded Mount Diablo as the Zodiac's starting point, because this is the only way their interpretation of the X's could possibly work. It can be strongly argued that the Zodiac was familiar with Mount Diablo as a measurement tool, widely used in surveying and calculating land boundaries in the majority of Northern California and Nevada, with the summit used as the initial point, the north-south meridian, and the east-west baseline intersection point. But because of the vastness of California, surveying required 3 initial points of Mount Diablo, Mount Pierce, and the San Bernardino Mountain to form grid lines. The Zodiac knew the prominence of Mount Diablo from an elevation standpoint, but was also likely knowledgeable about its use as a measurement tool, and why he chose this location to produce his own version of grid lines in his own unique set of puzzles. Of course, this doesn't mean that the Zodiac had any special knowledge of surveying or mathematics, despite his later use of the word radians. He could easily have learnt these concepts in a matter of minutes or hours, just as we did when presented with the radian as an angular measurement tool through his communications.
The threats on schoolchildren began with the Zodiac killer's October the 13th, 1969 letter, promising to shoot out the front tyre and then pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out. Before these details emerged in the newspapers, the Zodiac killer telephoned Santa Rosa with a further threat towards school buses. October the 17th, 1969, saw a Santa Rosa school bus driver report gunshots near the vicinity of her bus. The Palo Alto Times newspaper reported that on October the 21st, 1969, somebody claiming to be the Zodiac killer threatened to pick off the kids as they get on the school bus. 2 days later, the telephone calls began at the home of Daniel Williams, threatening a Martinez school, and finally the bus bomb letter and crosshairs on November the 9th, 1969, ending 28 days of continuous threats on schoolchildren. Would it really be that surprising if the Zodiac killer's threat to do his thing on November the 9th, 1969, using an unidentified X on the crosshairs, would be at or close to the Salesian High School of Daniel Williams on a school bus? Unfortunately, this crime falls outside the mainstream Zodiac story that people are overwhelmingly accustomed to, and as such will be summarily dismissed by the majority of the Zodiac community on that basis alone. Police discounted the idea that the telephone caller to Daniel Williams was a Zodiac killer, just like they would discount the telephone call to the Oklahoma radio station 6 weeks later. How they concluded either of these instances were not the Zodiac killer without ever hearing the call or progressing the case forward beggars belief. Probably the same way some people in the Zodiac community feel comfortable calling Zodiac communications hoaxes without doing an ounce of research into them. Sometimes it's just easier to look at a communication and say it doesn't look like Zodiac, or rely on somebody else in perceived higher authority telling you it's not Zodiac. This podcast has attempted to probe a little further into the case of Daniel Williams. It cannot prove unequivocally that Daniel Williams was targeted by the Zodiac killer, but hopefully will make you consider the idea that some research is better than none at all.
Do you obsess over cold cases?
Do you go down endless rabbit holes on online forums, searching for clues to solve your pet case?
Are you an armchair sleuth? If so, we'd like to invite you to check out our new podcast, Citizen Detective.
I'm Mike Morford.
I'm Nama Cates.
And I'm Dr. Lee Meller. We work hand in hand with citizen detectives just like you to examine some of the most puzzling unsolved mysteries out there.
Citizen Detective is out right now, and new episodes drop every other Saturday.
Subscribe now so you don't miss a single episode of Citizen Detective.
Tired of trying diet after diet without results? Mochi Health offers a long-term weight loss solution personalized to your needs. Our board-certified obesity doctors and registered dietitians provide expert guidance to help you succeed. Eligible patients can access custom-formulated GLP-1 medication at an affordable set price delivered monthly. Take our free quiz at joinmochi.com and use code AUDIO40 for $40 off your first month. That's joinmochi.com.
On March 22, 1971, the Pines card was presumably mailed by the Zodiac addressed to the Los Angeles Times, San Francisco Examiner, and San Francisco Chronicle, depicting an artist's rendition of houses among the trees in a Boise Cascade Company project at Incline Village, taken from an advertisement placed in the newspaper. Most Zodiac researchers, whether they believe this correspondence was mailed by the real Zodiac or not, are of the opinion that this postcard was cryptically suggesting the author's involvement in the disappearance of Donna Lass, a 25-year-old nurse from the Sahara Tahoe Hotel Casino, who vanished on September 6, 1970, while nearing the end of her shift. The story received extensive coverage in the San Francisco Chronicle on September 26, 1970, in a page 3 article titled, "Nurse Vanishes, a Tahoe Mystery," and it also shed light on the recent murder of Judith Ann Hikari. She was a 23-year-old nurse who disappeared after her shift at the Sutter Memorial Hospital in Sacramento on March 7, 1970. Judith Hikari was ultimately found buried along Ponderosa Way in Weimar by 2 hikers on April 25, 1970. The Zodiac, presumably having laid claim to the murders of Kathy Snoozy, Deborah Furlong, Sergeant Richard Raditich, and the abduction of Kathleen Johns at this juncture, failed to add Donna Lass or Judith Hikari to his running victim count. His belated and cryptic admission to his involvement in this crime would come over 6 months later, when he pasted several newspaper cuttings and 5 phrases on the Pines card, reading, "Sierra Club, sought victim 12, peeked through the pines, past Lake Tahoe areas, and around in the snow," which was pasted upside down. Everything pasted on this card appeared to be inspired by the San Francisco Chronicle article on September 26, 1970, which detailed the movements of Donna Lass regarding her profession as far back as January 1970. It also provided details of her family who lived in Beresford, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which would later come into play in a mysterious Christmas card mailed to the sister of Donna Lass on December 27, 1974. As well as the pasted newspaper cuttings, the Zodiac had punched out a hole in the top right corner of the image side of the card, and added his customary crosshairs in the bottom right corner. But why did the Zodiac insinuate his involvement in the disappearance and possible murder of Donna Lass after such a lengthy delay? He had mailed several communications in the interim, and failed to mention the young nurse.
The answer may be extremely simple. He had nothing to do with the disappearance of Donna Lass. In fact, on October the 5th, 1970, the Zodiac killer effectively admitted he was not involved in the South Lake Tahoe disappearance of Donna Lass. On this date, the Zodiac killer mailed the 13-hole postcard, again containing several sections of pasted text, including the wording, "Some of them thought it was horrible," in addition to the number 13 and 13 punch holes on its right side. Just over 2 months earlier, the Zodiac killer had mailed the Little List letter on July 26, 1970, proclaiming 13 victims. Yet in the 13-hole postcard, the Zodiac killer didn't raise his victim count at all, despite Donna Lass having disappeared in between these 2 communications. His victim count remained static, and all he could muster was the proclamation of, quote, "Some of them thought it was horrible." However, this proclamation was good proof he was the Zodiac killer, and had mailed the Little List letter on July 26, 1970, which had not been released by the newspapers at the time the 13-hole postcard was mailed. The Little List letter opened with how the Zodiac killer would torture his eventual slaves in paradise, using the future tense throughout and stating, quote, Some I shall tie over anthills and watch them scream and twitch and squirm. He then went on to quote Gilbert and Sullivan's The Mikado, using Act 1, Part 5A, entitled As Some Day It May Happen, stating, "As some day it may happen that a victim must be found." No surprise then that the later 13-hole postcard would adopt the past tense and recall what happened when he tortured the victims he found by stating some of them thought it was horrible, with some being the operative word in both communications, and proving the 13-hole postcard was authentic Zodiac material. The Zodiac killer knew he hadn't confessed to the disappearance and probable murder of Donna Lass on October the 5th, 1970, so created the Pines card on March the 22nd, 1971, mimicking the style of the 13-hole postcard and retrospectively claiming his long-time involvement in her pursuit and demise by using the past tense when pasting the wording "sought victim 12. The claim that this victim total of 12 being out of sequence with other known Zodiac communications is proof of a hoaxer being responsible for the Pines card is inherently flawed logic. The author of the Pines card wasn't claiming 12 victims, only that he once sought victim 12. For one to believe the Pines card was crafted by an incompetent hoaxer, we would have to believe that they had spent the time choosing particular wording from the newspapers, cut and pasted these 5 selected phrases onto a postcard, punched a hole in the top right corner of the postcard, and scalloped its edges, being so stupid as to not have read any of the previous newspaper articles about the Zodiac killer and his running victim totals. The logical conclusion regarding the Pines card is that it was deliberately engineered using the word sought, which is the past participle of seek. The suggestion being that he had once sought Donna Lass as his 12th victim. This makes perfect sense when we consider that the April the 20th, 1970 Zodiac letter claimed 10 victims, and his June the 26th, 1970 Zodiac letter claimed 12 victims. Any victim sought between these two dates could conceivably have become Zodiac's 12th victim. Donna Lass was resident at 4122 Balboa Street, San Francisco, between the dates of April the 20th, 1970 and the early part of June 1970, before she moved to begin her job at the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino on June the 6th, 1970. A Zodiac killer trailing Donna Lass before her move to South Lake Tahoe could have unquestionably sought her as victim number 12 between these dates. By using the phrase sought victim 12 in the Pines card, the Zodiac killer was effectively connecting himself to Donna Lass through San Francisco and South Lake Tahoe, and hopefully cementing the belief in investigators' minds that he knew Donna Lass over an extended period of time. He most likely wasn't trailing her at all, and probably wasn't her killer, but by using the sought victim 12 phrase, the Zodiac killer is effectively suggesting this as a possibility to law enforcement in order to boost his credibility. The information about Donna Lass having worked at the Letterman General Hospital in the Presidio Park, close to the Zodiac's final victim, Paul Stein, on October the 11th, 1969, was widely covered in the newspapers, along with the date she moved to South Lake Tahoe. Therefore, by incorporating the phrase sought victim 12 into the Pines card, he is effectively bridging the gap between the murder of the taxicab driver and the disappearance of Donna Lass, who are both indelibly connected to the Presidio Heights district of San Francisco. This phrase, sought victim 12, wasn't a mistake. It was deliberately fashioned to plant a seed in the mind of law enforcement.
The Pines card was likely created by the Zodiac sometime between March 19, 1971 and March 21, 1971, using an advertisement taken from the San Francisco Chronicle on Friday, March 19, 1971. There was more than one version of the Forest Pines advertisement created, but the one from the San Francisco Chronicle used the uppercase letter P in peek when the Zodiac killer pasted the phrase "peek through the pines" on the postcard. Other examples on the internet use the lowercase letter p. There have been many explanations for the punch hole in the top right corner, including the possibility it somehow gave us directions to the burial site of Donna Lass. But if the Zodiac had no hand in the disappearance and murder of Donna Lass, then the punch hole in the top right corner would be a meaningless addition by the Zodiac killer. Therefore, the punch hole is more likely to have been created for another reason. Here's one possibility. The Zodiac phoned the police and gave them directions to his latest victims after the attacks at Blue Rock Springs on July 4th, 1969, and Lake Berryessa on September 27th of that year. In the bus bomb letter on November 9th, 1969, he also informed police of his directional movements after the murder of Paul Stein on October 11th, 1969. The Zodiac seemed extremely keen to inform police of his murder sites and movements. The Pines card is inherently different because it doesn't make it very clear as to who the communication is about with its arrival on March 22, 1971, 6.5 months after the disappearance of Donna Lass. So maybe the clue to the identity of Donna Lass is to be found using the cryptic messages pasted on the card, directed towards police, and giving them directions that ultimately reveal his claimed victim's name. The following is taken from the South Lake Tahoe Police Department website. Quote, "The South Lake Tahoe Police Department was formed July 1st, 1967. The first home of the department was on the southwest corner of Lake Tahoe Boulevard and D Street. This is currently the present location of the city courtyard. By the spring of 1969, SLTPD had 33 officers, 7 civilian positions, and 9 vehicles. We needed a bigger facility. So during the tenure of John Crow, the second chief of police at the helm of SLTPD, the police department moved to a month-to-month rental facility at Fremont Avenue and Mono Way. So it's clear that the South Lake Tahoe Police Department on March 22, 1971 was located at Fremont Avenue and Mono Avenue in the southern tip of Lake Tahoe. Bearing in mind the Zodiac's edition of Sierra Club on the Pines card, we probably have to be looking in the area of Clear Tappan Lodge, a private club for Sierra Club members, situated on the northwestern side of the lake. If the police left their station and passed the Lake Tahoe areas on the western side and headed to Clear Tappan Lodge on Donner Pass Road, then they would literally have to peek through the pines to view the Sierra Club, situated 78 meters northwards, around in the snow. You can view this image on Google Maps by dropping down to the roadside edge. If you superimpose the Sierra Club from the postcard over Clear Tappan Lodge, the punch hole card can land exactly over the Donner Memorial State Park, and therefore, it's a possible clue to the name of Donna in memoriam. This wouldn't be the only time the Zodiac used a pasted postcard in possible Memorial Park to retrospectively claim a victim, when he possibly used a Memorial Park to reveal another name on July 13, 1971.
Just under 4 months later, the sister card to the Pines card would arrive at the San Francisco Chronicle, dubbed the Monticello card, and postmarked July the 13th, 1971. Although an image of this postcard has never been released, it is possible to authenticate this postcard through the 148-character cipher and letter mailed shortly before this offering, with the contents of both the 148-character cipher and 340-character cipher having common links to the Jim Dunbar TV show, despite the 340 cipher being unsolved in 1971. Additionally, both the 148 cipher and letter and Monticello card show an ongoing connection to the murders of Kathy Snoozy and Deborah Furlong through other communications and a payphone call. More details can be found by reading The San Jose Murders and Zodiac on my Zodiac Ciphers website and the link at the foot of that article. The Monticello card was another postcard with pasted newspaper cuttings reading, "Near Monticello, short victims 21, in the woods dies April." This postcard drew from the playbook of the Pines card, retrospectively claiming the murder of Kathy Bieck in the Villa Montalvo woods in April, by linking to another memorial park and the burial site of a victim he had previously claimed in the Dripping Pen card on November the 8th, 1969. Kathy Snoozy was buried in the neighbourhood of Monticello in the Oak Hill Memorial Park and Cemetery, located in San Jose, near to the Villa Montalvo woods. The Zodiac Killer was hinting at Kathy Biek through her phonetic namesake Kathy Snoozy, who along with Deborah Furlong were attributed as victims of Carl Francis Werner on April 29, 1971, when he was arrested and questioned about the murders of all three girls. The Zodiac Killer, unwilling to relinquish his claim on the Snoozy and Furlong murders that began in writing on November 8, 1969, opted to insinuate his involvement in the murder of Kathy Biek as well. She was the focus of the Monticello card by using Kathy Snoozy as the clue. The Monticello card pretty much mirrored the Pines card, both of which used a victim's name concealed in the cryptic clues of newspaper cuttings. Kathy Biek, aged 18, was found murdered on April the 11th in the Villa Montalvo woods by her father, Charles, while Santa Clara County Sheriff's deputies searched nearby. She had been stabbed 17 times in the back and 32 times in her chest and stomach. The Villa Montalvo woods in Saratoga was near Monticello, which was a neighborhood to be found 9 miles to the east. The use of clues and directional hints in the Monticello card should give us a clue to the Zodiac Killer's intention when designing the Pines card. A name was at the heart of both.
Investigator Harvey Hines believed the punch hole in the top right corner of the Pines card may have pointed toward the burial site of Donna Lass, or at least revealed key information about her disappearance. An area near Clear Tappan Lodge, Northern California, on Sierra Club grounds was identified. It's where a rock configuration of 13 stones were positioned in the form of a cross. This area had initially been discovered by Otto Fredericks while out hiking in 1976, and it was revealed to Harvey Hines years later. Hines informed Zodiac expert Dave Peterson, and a limited excavation of the site was undertaken, but no remains were found. Harvey Hines worked tirelessly with Mary Pilker, the sister of Donna Lass, producing a 120-page report on his findings. It's been claimed by certain individuals that in 1999, a retired detective revealed that a former Zodiac investigator had admitted to forging the last postcard. As with many stories in the Zodiac case, words get misconstrued, and that could be the case in this instance. Harvey Hines created an alternative Pines card using Clear Tappan Lodge as the image on the postcard. He stated in his 120-page report, quote, "After studying the card, I drove to Norton, located on Old Highway 40, north of Lake Tahoe, and found the Sierra Club. I learned the club was not called the Sierra Club. It was named the Clear Tappan Lodge, and it was a private club for Sierra Club members only. I believed if I followed the directions on the postcard, I would find Donna Lass's grave. I believe she was buried near the Sierra Club and most likely on the Donner Ski Ranch. I would later have the pictures of the Sierra Club developed. Then, using a copy of Zodiac's card, I cut out the phrases he had pasted on his card. Using the phrases, I overpasted them on the copy of the Sierra Club picture. It was strikingly similar to the original card. The wording of "around in the snow" pasted upside down at the foot of the Pines card has led understandably to this being interpreted as Donna Lass being buried somewhere in the region of Lake Tahoe. This is inevitably the first instinct when looking at this phrase and comparing it to the punch hole in the top right corner of the card. But if the Zodiac wasn't the abductor or murderer of Donna Lass, any search efforts based around this punch hole will inevitably lead to a wild goose chase.
In his first contact with police on July the 5th, 1969, the Zodiac Killer gave us accurate compass directions to the crime scene at Blue Rock Springs by phoning the Vallejo Police Department and stating, "I want to report a double murder. If you will go 1 mile east, on Columbus Parkway to the public park, you will find the kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year." His spatial awareness was apparent when he described the position of Betty Lou Jensen's body in the turnout on July the 31st, 1969, reporting that the girl was on her right side, feet to the west. His compass bearings were correct when phoning dispatcher Dave Slate after the attack at Lake Berryessa on September the 27th, 1969, stating, "I want to report a murder. No, a double murder. They are 2 miles north of park headquarters. They were in a white Volkswagen Carmen Ghia." The Zodiac killer went into great detail regarding his movements after the Paul Stein murder in Presidio Heights on October the 11th, 1969, telling police in the bus bomb letter on November the 9th, 1969, that he disappeared into the park a block and a half away, never to be seen again, and that there were only 2 groups of parking about 10 minutes apart. Then the motorcycles went by about 150 feet away, going from south to northwest. He offered us a spatial puzzle at the foot of the bus bomb letter using X marks on the circumference of the crosshairs, and on June the 26th, 1970, gave us a Phillips 66 map allied with radians and inches to locate the position he had buried a bomb. These puzzles and directional instructions were evident in both the Pines card and Monticello card in 1971, when he pasted the phrases "Pass Lake Tahoe areas, peek through the pines, around in the snow, Sierra Club, near Monticello, and in the woods," all of which are designed to instruct police to a set location. He was directing police to locations in 1969 and 1970, so why should it be any different in 1971? These postcards were puzzles, just like the ciphers and codes he delighted in mailing to the newspapers and police.
Tired of trying diet after diet without results? Mochi Health offers a long-term weight loss solution personalized to your needs. Our board-certified obesity doctors and registered dietitians provide expert guidance to help you succeed. Eligible patients can access custom-formulated GLP-1 medication at an affordable set price delivered monthly. Take our free quiz at joinmochi.com and use code AUDIO40 for $40 off your first month. That's joinmochi.com.
This is the Zodiac speaking.
The Zodiac killer made a call to Santa Rosa on October the 15th, in my opinion, and promised to plant bombs on school buses, which complemented his threat to pick off kiddies as they came bouncing off the bus in the Paul Stein letter. Then there was a possible shooting of a school bus on October the 17th. The prolonged attack on Daniel Williams, which included him threatening a Martinez school, was just a further extension of his focus on school children and possibly school buses, especially when we consider the similar phraseology used in the phone calls to Daniel Williams and his bus bomb letter on November the 9th, 1969. People have suggested he didn't commit further attacks after the Paul Stein murder because he escaped by the skin of his teeth. So the Zodiac killer may have switched to this poisoning because the risk factor was much lower. If Daniel Williams had drank the 7-Up drink, he would be dead. It is really difficult, therefore, to characterise this phone caller as a casual hoaxer, as police did. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think in this case, there's a lot of people that just dismiss a lot of Zodiac stuff. They'll say it's a hoax letter. There were a lot of hoaxers and yada, 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 and they don't give it much thought. And if it's not a confirmed Zodiac correspondence or attack, they sort of just dismiss it. I think in this case, especially with Daniel Williams, the person that was interacting with him claiming to be Zodiac definitely was capable of murder. He poisoned his drink. So to just dismiss that as a hoaxer, no possible way of it being Zodiac, is just foolish, in my opinion. There's too much to suspect that it could be Zodiac. It could be another person that's dangerous, just trying to shift blame to Zodiac or shift blame from himself. Maybe it was a close friend of his that didn't like him, and he said, I'll throw Zodiac's name out there, and then they won't think it's me. That could be. But at the same time, we can't just rule out the Zodiac altogether, because we know Zodiac was a confirmed killer, and this person tried to kill Daniel Williams. If it is Zodiac, and again, at this point, I don't know how we're going to prove that, but if it was Zodiac that tried to poison Daniel Williams, a couple interesting points. Why is he in Contra Costa County to be there to be poisoning Daniel Williams? And why did he choose Daniel Williams? Did he have some kind of gripe with him? Did he know him? Or was it just a person that he randomly chose? There has to be some kind of reason to pick him out if it was Zodiac.
He was actually in the vicinity, I presume, if he made the phone call to the Oakland Police Department on October the 22nd. That's not too far away from Daniel Williams' home.
Yeah, and that brings up the point. And again, this is the hard part, is we can't necessarily prove this is Zodiac, but it is. If you have an open mind and you think that for a second, the question is, why is he in this area now? Why is he not in Vallejo or his Napa, San Francisco? Those are the primary places that he targeted, especially Vallejo. Now he's in another town, and there's some activity there. There's the call. There's the threat on Daniel Williams. We can go even a step further. We could bring up Ed Salmina, threatened in another town by someone claiming to be Zodiac. So if any of these are Zodiac, you just have to wonder, why is he targeting other people in other towns? How did he pick them out? Or are they random? I mean, we can even go to the Dr. Adams threat in Orinda. If that's a Zodiac correspondence that's legitimate, how did he pick him out? So where some people are just dismissive and they say, look, if it's not one of these confirmed Zodiac things, I don't want anything to do with it. I'm not even going to consider it. To me, that's having a closed mind. And when you have a closed mind, you have a case that's not solved for 50 years. You're not thinking outside the box. And that's exactly where we're at.
Well, Edward C. Adams, he was also a docent. He taught in further education in San Francisco. So we have unearthed a sort of common link where there's at least 4 teachers that could have been targeted by the Zodiac.
In San Francisco?
It's the Psychoanalysis Institute, off the top of my head.
Okay.
It was further education.
Okay. Now,
basically taught. That's why if you read that letter to Edward C. Adams, it said, "You taught me to mean it."
Yeah. And I wonder,
carry on.
I was going to say, I wonder if that is a student of his saying that, "You taught me to mean it," or is that a patient that he had that he was trying to help with some issues he was having? That "you taught me to mean it" could have different meanings depending on who wrote that. Or
he just learned about his background and threw it out there.
Yeah, and then it's just a random person that he picked out and chose.
Now, an individual in the San Francisco Chronicle newspaper noticed that all but one of the X's on the bus bomb crosshairs lined up with the claimed murders of Zodiac. And by claimed murders, I mean he was claiming the San Jose murders as well. Now, the only way this guy could have worked out that these lined up with his murders, where the X's lined up with the murders, was he could only achieve this if he used Mount Diablo as the center point of the crosshairs. So this guy from the Chronicle may have predicted what Zodiac did many months later. So, in other words, the Zodiac killer may have done this technique well in advance of the button letter and little list letter. Do you place any credence on the notion of a killer choosing his attack sites based on their position on a map as of November the 9th, 1969, or a clock face?
So that's been a theory that's been out there for a while, that there's, a clock, radians, whatever you want to say, something that he's plotting something on these different areas to attack. It could be when someone's mentally unhinged like Zodiac obviously was, then you have to wonder, where are they getting their motivation from? So, I can't say one way or the other whether he was doing that or not. But if he was, he'd have to really stake out these different areas, get to know them, be on patrol for victims that might be there to get him in the right spot. I personally think that he found his victims randomly at different locations. But if we go all the way back to the 1969 Fairfield letters, this possible Zodiac letter that most people dismiss as a hoax mentioned several different towns where victims would be claimed. And some of those towns that were mentioned in that letter later on did have some activity from someone claiming to be Zodiac. So I'm not one to just flat out dismiss stuff, and I have an open mind to it. So whether or not we can tell or learn whether Zodiac was picking out victims at random locations or whether he had them plotted out in advance. I think you have to have an open mind to both.
And the only problem with him putting these X's to line up with victims he chose is that he wasn't responsible for the murders of the two girls in San Jose. So he either added that knowing it lined up with the concept he'd already created, or it just wasn't a concept in the first place.
Yeah, and that's the rub. You don't really know which is true.
Now, the Zodiac threatened to do his thing in the bus bomb letter if certain details weren't published in the newspaper, and deliberately placed this threat within the crosshairs on the letter, strongly suggesting that one of the X's around the circumference was his intended next attack. A failure to do this by the Chronicle would result in this attack if they didn't print out the section he highlighted on page 3. That was the part about Donald Fouke and the two cops pulled a goof. It seems, Mike, that like the little list letter, when he placed writing alongside his crosshairs, it meant searching for a target. So I think I'll put a FOIA request in for the San Jose letter on November the 21st, in which he mentioned the word thing for a third time, because this letter, I think, may validate this concept that I'm trying to search for in the bus bomb letter. What do you reckon? Do you reckon it's worth a go now?
Yeah, I'm one that I'd like to see every letter that's ever been rumored or been reported. I'd like to see each one and just get a look at them myself, just so I can make my own interpretations and see what the writing looks like, see the language, and just get a feel for each one. So anything that can be brought out that we haven't seen before, I think is worth trying to get. Now, I think at this stage of the game, it's going to be very tough to do. I've gone down that road trying to get some of the letters that we've seen reported that have never come out, but I don't know how productive that will be, but, definitely go for it. I think it's worth doing.
The following relies on the idea that Daniel Williams was targeted because he was just a school teacher, with the concept that we've been examining, that he targeted school children and school buses over this period of a couple of months. The fact that this person who made malicious calls to Daniel Williams referenced targeting a school within the call appears to suggest this person knew that Williams was a school teacher. This could suggest that this person had a grudge against Williams, who either worked with him at the Richmond school or knew him personally. But if it was the Zodiac killer who targeted Williams and schools to continue his threat on school children, how would he have learnt of Williams as a school teacher and his home address other than trailing him from the school to his house?
Well, that's the thing. I think it's impossible to know. I mean, he could have randomly saw him and said, that's the guy I'm going to target. Then again, could he have known him in some way? Did he have an interaction with him that he didn't like and he was angry with him? Did he know him from the past and, he had a beef with him from years before? We just don't know. So I think any of the possibilities you have to consider and not lock into one of them, because I think we just can't know. So anything's on the table.
Do you get frustrated looking at these outlier crimes and outlier letters? Because it seems that we always get so far, but then we just hit a roadblock where we can't go any further than basically internet searching, because we're not going to get any information from the police.
Yeah, it is frustrating because you never know if one of these letters that many people thinks are hoaxes or nothing to do with the real Zodiac, if they are from the real Zodiac and we don't explore those avenues, we may be missing some kind of clue that might help us. Even the police were dismissive of a lot of different things. Go back to that Oklahoma radio call. They sort of brush that off immediately without really any reason to do so. What would have been the harm of checking that out and trying to get that voice and seeing if it matched the real Zodiac, playing it for some of the ear witnesses? But they didn't really go down that avenue. What would have been the harm? The worst case scenario, they would have said, no, that's not him. It doesn't sound anything like him. Then they could have moved on maybe, but not following up on some of these possible Zodiac crimes or Zodiac correspondences, calls, whatever you want to call them, I think is a mistake. I want to see everything looked at and then ruled out one by one.
What do you say to people who say it's pointless examining these letters and trying to understand the concept behind them and the meaning behind them when it's simply not going to crack the case? Let's just stick with DNA and fingerprints and that's it.
Well, in the end of the day, that is really what it comes down to. I mean, DNA and prints are physical evidence that will solve the case. We know, especially after the Riverside fiasco, that writing is highly open to interpretation, to opinion, whereas fingerprints and DNA are physical evidence. But then again, some of these mailings, is there DNA on some of these envelopes and these other question mailings? Because if there is, I'd like to know who it belongs to. And then you can go back and determine who that DNA belongs to, find any prints that are on there, match them to somebody, and then you could do an investigation. Say, okay, this person definitely wasn't Zodiac. They were a hoaxer. So to me, these are all missed opportunities to rule people out. Any hoaxed letter, the 1978 letters that most people say are hoaxed, the Eureka card, any of those things, why not determine who sent them via DNA or prints if you can, and just check them off the list. If they turn out not to be the real Zodiac, you just whittle down that list but try it. See what you come up with and scratch some people off the list, because when you've got a 50-year-old case that isn't solved, you've got to think outside the box. You've got to do different things, or it's just going to go unsolved forever.
Me, along with many people, have examined the Paul Stein murder to death, basically, where we've examined his movements after the crime, where he went. None of this is actually going to solve the crime, but I think people, it's the wrong word, but enjoy mysteries within the mystery, answering questions. Unsolved mysteries are just people don't like unanswered questions. So it's not just about searching and finalizing who the Zodiac killer is. People like answering the questions within the mystery itself.
Yeah, they do. And, I'm of the opinion that there's some people that really deep down don't want this case to be solved, because they'll lose something that they get to talk about, that they get to interact with. So I think there's some people out there, unfortunately, that aren't in favor of this case being solved.
Continuing with communications, then we'll move on to the second part of this podcast and talk about the Pines card. We know a small proportion of killers send communications to the police. An even smaller amount create cryptic puzzles and use pasted text from reading material. And when I talk about pasted text, I don't mean just putting pasted text onto a blank piece of paper. The Zodiac killer in the Pines card placed pasted text over a picture and made a more elaborate card. Does the choice of the Zodiac killer to use pasted text on the 13-hole postcard and Pines card add validity to the two horoscope mailings in December 1969, which were never published? And could these two December mailings also carry directional information to prove they were about Leona Roberts?
Well, whoever, let's assume for a second that Zodiac really sent them. It's hard to get in his mind and know what he was thinking about, what message he was trying to send. I think with all of his communications, he tried to give little hints, little clues that maybe wouldn't necessarily tell who they were, but they were things maybe connected to him, his interest. But some people dismiss some of these letters. Some people dismiss the 13-hole card, the Donna Lass mailings, where there's any kind of magazine cuttings, or the Birds Fly South 555 mailing. They just dismiss them as some hoaxer and just right out of the box. But we know that Zodiac did do some artistic stuff. In the Halloween card to Avery, for example, he doctored that card up and did some artistic stuff with it, some arts and crafts type stuff to it. So to just flat out dismiss these other things in which the sender did the same thing is foolish in my opinion.
Did you check into the 555 thing? Because that was actually doctored by the police. There was a handwriting on that, on the horoscope page. I think it was the cancer page. And you can read it in the FBI files, where it clearly states they had handwriting on that horoscope page, which we've never seen.
Yeah, and to me, I wonder why. Is it something that police are holding back and they think of might be valuable? Because why not release it if that's the case? It's kind of hard to know. I don't remember I definitely never got any more material that wasn't available. I requested everything basically from the Department of Justice relating to the Zodiac case, which is how I got so many different letters released, but I don't remember getting anything for that one. It's been so long. But again, some of these weird letters that a lot of people just dismiss as not being Zodiac, who knows if any of those are Zodiac, and why not try and determine who the sender of each one was? Maybe one of these letters came with DNA or fingerprints on it. If you can rule that person out, it's just one person off the list. But then again, you never know. It could actually be Zodiac. The letter of the threat on a baby that was floating in a bottle, floating in the water in the Bay Area. That one, for example, could have very well been some nut just trying to get attention, or trying to get, some shock value and that kind of thing. But who knows? Maybe it's really the Zodiac. So in my opinion, everything should be looked at, considered, and tested and ruled. Try and identify who wrote each thing and rule them out one by one until you get to the real person that was the Zodiac.
Was the bottle one about the ending of the Vietnam War?
Yeah. So again,
it was later on, wasn't it?
It was
1973 or 5?
I think it was. I think it was in the early 70s, but 1973. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was Stockton, so it was dated February 2nd.
Yes, and featured in the newspaper on May the 11th.
Yep.
Yeah, February the 7th. February the 2nd, yes.
So, again, we never saw that handwriting. We don't know what it looks like. May look nothing like Zodiac's. But then again, why not just try and get our hands on it? And why didn't they release it? What's the harm in releasing it? And what did they go through to check it? Did they check for prints? Did they just immediately say it's a hoax and get rid of it? These are the things that we still don't know after all these years, and it wouldn't hurt to have an answer to these things.
I think the likelihood is they've just thrown these things away.
Yeah, which I think is a mistake.
It's a shame.
Is a mistake, because you never know if one letter that's questioned matches another letter that's questioned, and all of a sudden you have the same person sending more than one question document. There's a pattern there, and it's worth trying to explore who these people were.
All the details about the disappearance of Donna Lass were available in the September the 26th, 1970 Chronicle article, which floated the idea of a connection between the murder of Judith Hikari and the Donna Lass disappearance, because both were attacked after their nurse's shift. When you combine these two victims to the Sherry Jo Bates link offered up by Paul Avery in November 1970, in which the letter Z was mentioned in regards to the Bates letters, it isn't difficult to conceive that Zodiac's total of 17 victims he was claiming 9 days before the Pines card included Donna Lass, Judith Hikari, and Sherry Jo Bates. From the Halloween card claiming 14 victims, the Zodiac killer had added 3 more victims subsequently. In actual fact, the Zodiac killer wrote 17 plus victims, with the plus sign likely referring to the additional victims he was insinuating down south. We both have come to the conclusion that Donna Lass was likely not a Zodiac victim, but what about one perpetrator being responsible for the fate of both nurses? And what are your thoughts on the 17 plus and what it denotes?
I think obviously it seems like Zodiac's trying to up his total, his victim count. I think there's nothing, again, like you just mentioned, I don't think they're Zodiac victims, either of them. But it does seem like maybe he took a little bit more, if it was Zodiac. Again, there's some people that still don't think it was Zodiac, but if it was Zodiac, he seemed to focus on getting a little bit more credit for Donna Lass than Judith Hikari. The stuff he wrote, the little clues seemed to point towards her case over Hikari. So I wonder if that's the case and he didn't really do it, why he chose to take credit for her and not both of them. I mean, he could have sent a letter to police in Judith Hikari's case and said that he was responsible there too. So I go back to when he saw stuff maybe in the news, did some certain people stick with him as far as victims that he could claim? Did they jump out to him and say, this person sounds interesting, I'm going to take credit for their disappearance or their murder? But then again, I also look at, I wouldn't want to lose sight, for example, Donna Lass had ties to Vallejo. She visited Vallejo. She had friends in that area. She had a cousin named Wayne Lass that lived in Vallejo, and his wife's name was Donna. So I always found that interesting, and I wouldn't just rule out the fact that Zodiac could have known her in some capacity or knew her family and maybe didn't necessarily abduct her, but when he heard about her story, it sort of jumped out to him because he had some connection there to her. So he chose to take credit for her case. Again, at the end of the day, I don't think that he abducted her, but there's got to be a reason why he chose to, if it was him that sent that stuff, that he chose to focus on her.
I felt it was going to be difficult for the Zodiac killer to not accept what Paul Avery had claimed in November 1970, because he basically handed the Sherry Joe Bates murder to Zodiac on a plate. And I can't believe that the Zodiac would have turned that down, which he clearly didn't, because that's what he was insinuating in his letter. And therefore, when they were comparing the murders of Hikari and Donna Lass together, I found it difficult to believe that he wouldn't want to have insinuated his involvement in both of those crimes also, which gave me the reason for believing those were the three victims that increased the total from 14 to 17. The plus sign, he was never, even if he was trying to convince us he'd killed people down south, he clearly wasn't going to put those under the Zodiac umbrella because they weren't committed under the Zodiac umbrella. But also, then why was he claiming Sherry Joe Bates in the umbrella as well, which doesn't, it sort of contradicts. The plus sign is suggesting, oh, there's loads more down south, and yet the three victims I'm estimating included Sherry Joe Bates, maybe because Paul Avery identified that Z symbol, and therefore Zodiac specifically chose that to include under his Zodiac umbrella, because Paul Avery had pointed out the Z on those Bates letters. So I'm wondering whether that was included along with Donna Lass and Judith Hikari.
Well, it's definitely interesting to consider, and you point out that Paul Avery sort of pointed out to Zodiac the Bates case and sort of threw it to him. But I think if we backtrack, Zodiac was already aware of the Bates case, and we know this because of his use of twitch and squirm coming from the Bates confession letter, that he likely, there's only two ways he knew about that. And that was, he read it in one of those detective magazines that the Bates case was featured in before he used it as Zodiac, or he was in Riverside writing those letters there in 1966 and 67. The only real two possibilities. So I think in looking at that situation, we have to remember that it was Zodiac was already familiar with the Bates case one way or another. He either was involved in sending letters down there, or he had written it in the detective magazine. But also we have to wonder, why didn't he sort of take credit sooner? Because once that Bates connection ran in the Chronicle and stuff, he didn't jump right out and own it right away. I think there was a long delay before he acknowledged it. So I always wondered why that was.
In the Inside Detective magazine about the Bates murder, and up to the Little List letter, it had never been released that the three Bates letters, well, we didn't even know about the Bates letters, I presume, and we certainly didn't know about the Z signature, or the near Z signature, should I say. And yet, in the Little List letter, he starts using twitch and squirm and scream, and then he chooses a Halloween card, and Sherry Joe Bates was discovered on Halloween, and then for the first time ever, the Zodiac adds a Z symbol to the Halloween card, which is unusual because then the Paul Avery article comes out identifying letters with a Z symbol. But Zodiac wouldn't have known that when he wrote the Halloween card.
And that's a good point. So I think we have to be real careful and cautious, sort of comparing everything between the Bates connection, for example, and those question letters down there, and when it came out in the newspapers. You know, what did Zodiac know in advance? What didn't he know in advance?
On March the 16th, 1971, the Chronicle wrote, psychiatrists believe Zodiac's boasts of ever-increasing totals of victims is just that. At the moment, he is content by making claims of new victims which of course must be investigated by police almost as thoroughly as if a real corpse existed. After referring to Zodiac's claim of the Bates murder, the Chronicle added, the Zodiac's other murders have all occurred in Northern California. It would be 3 days later he started designing the Pines card, inferring his involvement in the last disappearance. Do you think it's likely he added Donna Lass as a victim to add credence to his claim of killing other people down south, showing he was actually capable of killing people not just in Northern California?
Well, I think, see, if we look at California, we look at the area where Donna Lass was abducted from, we presume abducted from, that area of California is sort of in the north. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I don't know that her case, connecting himself to her case, is necessarily going to give himself more credit to Southern California, because he could have, if he wanted to, he could have read in the papers about other crimes down there and tried to take credit for them. He could have read about the Swindle murders, or he could have read about Domingo Edwards. He could have read about all these different cases down there, or he could have been involved in them. If so, why didn't he reference them? So I think there were a lot of other ways to connect himself to Southern California and make himself look like he was down there. Now, one thing, and when I was really high on Riverside being Zodiac, which I'm not as high on anymore, but when I was, I thought maybe he wanted to distance himself from that area and not point out that he had been there, because that would definitely narrow down the suspect list. If someone wasn't in Southern California in 66, 67, then they couldn't be Zodiac. So that would make it much harder, or much easier, I should say, to narrow down victims. So you could make an argument that maybe he didn't want too much attention connecting him down there, and that's why he sort of steered clear. Because if that's the case, if he just wanted to keep adding to his victim counts and making it seem like he was responsible for murders all over the state, he could have just researched Southern California murders and just, tied himself to all of them. So, I think we have to leave an open mind that maybe he didn't want to be connected to them for some reason.
So bearing that in mind, why do you think he specifically chose people like Kathleen Johns and Donna Lass to link to when he could have chosen anybody? Was there something particular about these crimes?
Well, you bring up a good point. Maybe the crimes that were connected to him by others are the ones he linked himself to. So when he read that Bates might be a Zodiac victim and someone else linked him to it, he took credit for it. When he read that Kathleen Johns might be a Zodiac victim, he took credit for it. So maybe he didn't pick out cases to connect himself to. Maybe he just connected himself to cases where he was already connected to by the press. But then again, that would explain Donna Lass. If he connected himself to Donna Lass, she was never considered a Zodiac victim before he, mailed that letter. So why would he? Does that mean that he really was responsible for her? Or did her case just sort of catch his attention and he wanted to make it seem like he was responsible for her?
But also, Zodiac was linked to other crimes that he never latched onto and never used that opportunity to start bragging about them.
Yeah, so, you have to wonder why certain ones he did take credit for and certain ones he didn't.
Now, the Zodiac killer didn't increase his total from the little list letter to the 13-hole postcard. So clearly, if you believe the 13-hole postcard is genuine Zodiac material, he didn't raise his total between these two. So clearly wasn't claiming Donna Lass after she was missing 1 month, because he never upped his total and her disappearance happened between these two communications. But now, 7 months later, he probably felt assured she was definitely a murder victim and the crime wasn't going to be solved. Do you think that's why he waited a particular length of time of at least 7 months before he started insinuating his involvement in her disappearance? Because he knew it wasn't going to be solved.
Well, that's the key, with if you start insinuating yourself, connecting yourself to a crime, and then all of a sudden it's solved, then you lose credibility. We could look at the Richard Raditich shooting, to where he took credit for that shooting and police arrested someone soon after. Now, of course, that case sort of fell apart against that suspect, so we don't really know who killed Richard Raditich. But at the time Zodiac mailed that letter saying he shot a man with a .38, the Raditich case was solved, or so they thought. So that might have made him look bad and lose credibility. So that could be why he did wait a good amount of time to take credit for something, so it wouldn't be solved while he's sending a letter in, and then they say, okay, he's sending in another letter, we already solved the case, and then they stop paying attention to him.
In terms of the Raditich case, he was actually quite clever, because he left the door ajar by saying, I shot a man in a parked car rather than a policeman. So if that case had been solved, he could have said, well, I didn't say I shot a policeman. I said I shot a man. You obviously haven't found him yet.
Yeah, so absolutely.
I think he was being particularly vague in that instance to leave the door open.
Yeah, absolutely. Or he wanted the police to sort of go back looking for someone that was killed with the .38 and give them some busy work to do and connect the dots themselves that it was Richard Raditich.
Exactly. So, Mike, do you want to tell people about our final podcast for now? We haven't finished the book on this Zodiac Speaking podcast series, but we are just temporarily putting it into hibernation. But in the next and final podcast for now, we have asked people for their questions so we can answer anything that we've covered in this podcast thus far. So do you want to add a bit more detail?
Yeah. So we've done this for how long now? Over a year?
About 15 months.
Yeah, and we've put out 30-something episodes. It is a good amount of work, and it is a grind. And we also don't want to rehash stuff. We don't want to keep coming up with the same things. We need time to sort of recharge our batteries and go back to look at things maybe that we didn't discuss or things that maybe come as developments. So we are going to step back. We are going to put the show on hiatus, which means no more new episodes for a while, but we'll not get rid of the podcast. It'll still be there so people can listen to the old episodes. And if there's any new developments, obviously if the case gets solved, if there's new suspects that make the news, things like that, we will definitely come back for updates. But down the road, if we come up with new things to talk about that we think people will want to hear about or are interested in, we'll definitely come back and put some new episodes. But for the time being, we're going to take a break and step back. But before we do, in the next episode, 2 weeks from this episode, we are going to do, as Rich mentioned, a question and answer session, and people can let us know what things we've talked about that maybe we missed the mark on, or they want to add to it. They have other ideas. Are there things that we didn't talk about that people want to talk about? Maybe give us some ideas of what we can do in the future. So anyone that has questions, suggestions, theories about things we've talked about, hit us up on social media. You can find us on Facebook under Zodiac Speaking Podcast. You can also go to Twitter, and our handle is Podcast Zodiac. You can go to my website, zodiackiller.net, and Rich started a thread asking for questions. Give us your questions, theories, ideas, whatever you want to talk about, and we will put them in the next episode that's going to be out in 2 weeks. And I just want to give a big shout out to a really big supporter. He's someone that never misses an episode. He's a user on Zodiac Killer Forum, the ZodiacKiller.com forum. His name is Tootie. He is one of my biggest fans. He never fails to mention listening to an episode. So Tootie, this is for you. Enjoy. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Zodiac Speaking. Please make sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you're listening now, so you don't miss a single episode. New episodes of Zodiac Speaking will air every other Saturday. If you want to follow or interact with us on social media, we'd love to hear from you. You can find Zodiac Speaking on Twitter with the handle @PodcastZodiac, or you can search Facebook for Zodiac Speaking Podcast.
And don't forget, you can get plenty of Zodiac details 24/7 by visiting my site at zodiacciphers.com or by going to Mike's site at zodiackiller.net.
If you'd like to help more people find Zodiac Speaking, please take a moment to rate the show and leave a review of it on your favorite podcast player or app. On behalf of Rich, this is Mike Morford, and I'd like to say thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Zodiac Speaking.